Raila Odinga, a businessman, scientist, and former academic aged about 80, is the son of Oginga Odinga, the former Vice President of Kenya from 1964 to 1966, and subsequently founder and leader of the opposition Kenya People's Union in 1966, which was banned in 1969. Raila Odinga was previously detained without charge or trial under the public security regulations from 1983 to early 1988, when he was adopted by Amnesty International as a prisoner of conscience. He was subsequently detained again without charge or trial from the late 1988 to 1989. He was arrested again on 4th July 1990 at his office in Ajib House in central Nairobi. He was detained the next day under the public security regulations, which provide for administrative detention for an indefinite period without charge or trial of anyone held to endangering the security of the state. Amnesty International has adopted him as a prisoner of conscience detained for his non-violent opinions as a leader supporter of multi-party democracy in Kenya. Kenneth Matiba and Charles Rubia, both former government ministers, of a number of businessmen, politicians, lawyers, and church leaders who were calling in early 1990 for the introduction of multi-party democracy in Kenya, although they had not formed themselves into an opposition party. A constitutional amendment of 1982 made Kenya a one-party state, with the ruling Kenya African National Union KANU as the only permitted party. Since the beginning of 1990, the multi-party issue had been hotly debated in public and in the media. The arrest of Kenneth Matiba and other pro-democracy activists in July 1990 followed several weeks of increasing political tension on the issue of multi-democracy. Those who spoke publicly in favor of the formation of other parties than KANU were branded as subversive by the government, and the tension increased as they began to attract police surveillance and harassment and eventually interrogation by the security police. The Directorate of State Security Intelligence, formerly known as the Special Branch, on 6th July 1991, Kenneth Matiba and Charles Rubia announced a statement to the press that they were going to apply for a license to hold a public rally in Nairobi in a month's time on the issue of multi-party democracy. In response, government ministers called for their detention. President Daniel Arap Moi expressed his determination that KANU should remain the only party in Kenya, and the opposition rally was banned. In June, the security police attempted to arrest Kenneth Matiba, but this was stopped by his lawyers because the arresting officers could not show them warrants for his arrest. His lawyers began to attract police surveillance themselves to the point where they were being prevented from speaking to him and other clients on professional matters. Their press conferences were broken up by police, and journalists had films, notebooks, tapes, and press cards confiscated. Kenneth Matiba and Charles Rubia were arrested on 4th July 1991, 3 days before the date of the banned rally. They had said that they would not defy the ban of the rally. Raila Odinga was also arrested on 4th July, shortly after the arrest of Kenneth Matiba and Charles Rubia whose lawyer, John Kaminwa, a well-known human rights lawyer, was also arrested when he went to the police headquarters to inquire about them. Hours later, two more human rights lawyers, Gitobu Imanyara and Mohammed Ibrahim, were arrested. There were press reports that Kenneth Matiba had met Raila Odinga to discuss a political alliance with him and his father Oginga Odinga, who had led the opposition KPU from 1966 until it was banned in 1969. No such political alliance had in fact been formed before they were arrested, and Oginga Odinga had made no statement by them on whether or not he would work with them. All six were detained under the public security regulations, which provide for the administrative detention for an indefinite period without charge or trial of anyone suspected of being a danger to the security of the state. Their detentions were announced by the authorities, with the exception of Mohammed Ibrahim's detention, which was never publicly disclosed. Their families' applications for the habeas corpus were refused by magistrates. Also arrested were 5 employees of Kenneth Matiba, but they were released a few days later. Gibson Kamau Kuria and Paul Mwite, 2 other well-known human rights lawyers, went into hiding 2 weeks later. Gibson Kamau Kuria took refuge in the US Embassy in Nairobi and later left Kenya for the USA. Kiraitu Mirungi, a lawyer who was also involved in human rights cases and the multi-party debate, was in Addis Ababa at the time of the arrests and did not return to Kenya. Events after their arrests, thousands of people still gathered at Nairobi's Kamukunji grounds on 7th July to demonstrate instead against the arrest. The demonstrators were tear-gassed and beaten by riot police, who fired shots over their heads. Anti-government rioting broke out and later spread to other areas in Nairobi and 2 other towns in Kenya. Over 30 deaths were reported, together with widespread arrests of pro-democracy protesters and looters. Over 1,500 people were taken to court, and some were charged with political or criminal offenses. Many were arrested for using the 2-finger V salute, meaning that they supported 2 parties, or for shouting "Release Matiba," amongst other anti-government slogans. Within a week, other prominent advocates of a multi-party system had also been arrested, including George Anyona, a former member of parliament who has been a prisoner of conscience adopted by Amnesty International before. Since then, many other suspected government opponents have been arrested and brought to court, mainly charged with possession of prohibited publication or so-called seditious publications, most of which merely contained criticism of the government and did not advocate violence. Some of those arrested had been closely associated with Kenneth Matiba and the developing multi-party movement. Most have been released on bail and not yet tried. The